Have you ever had a secret that was so big you felt like you might explode? Or maybe you have a brother or sister, and sometimes you get into big fights. Usually, these fights are about who gets to play with a toy or who gets the last cookie. But imagine if your fight was so big that the whole world was watching. Imagine if your brother was the king of a whole country, and he had the power to take away your name, your house, and your future. That is exactly what is happening right now in the royal family of England. It is like a movie, but it is real life. Prince Andrew is the younger brother of King Charles. For a long time, Andrew was a very important person. He lived in a palace and had many fancy titles. But he made some very big mistakes, and now his brother has to make a choice. Does he protect his brother, or does he protect the crown? This story is about a family that is breaking apart in front of everyone. It is about power, secrets, and a law that could change everything forever. We are going to look at the secret meetings, the angry phone calls, and the moment a prince realized he might lose everything. This is not just about a family. It is about the history of a whole nation. So get ready, because we are going to dive into the biggest royal fight of our time. I have some very serious and sad news to tell you about the royal family in England. Many people are talking about what might happen next to Prince Andrew. According to some new reports from the BBC, the leaders of the government and King Charles are thinking about doing something that has almost never been done before. They want to make a new law in Parliament. This law would be like a giant eraser. It would rub Prince Andrew's name right out of the line of succession. That is a big, fancy way of saying that Andrew would never, ever be allowed to be the king. This news is like a giant bomb going off in the middle of the palace. It is one of the most shocking things to happen to the royals in a very long time. If they actually make this law, it will be the first time in modern history that a king used the government to kick a member of his own family out of the royal line. It would mean that even though Andrew has royal blood, he is being told he is no longer part of the future of the throne. People who know Andrew say he is very, very angry. They say he is furious and he refuses to let this happen. He does not want to be forgotten by history. He is trying everything he can to stop this law from being passed. But while he is fighting, King Charles and the government are moving very fast. They want to finish this as soon as they can. They want to protect the name of the monarchy and make sure people still trust it. The sun was shining softly through the big, tall windows of Buckingham Palace. It was a quiet afternoon in London, but inside a secret room, things felt very heavy. The red carpet on the floor looked very bright, but the people in the room felt very somber. King Charles was sitting right in the middle. He is 78 years old now, and he became the king in May of 2023. When he became king, he got a crown with lots of beautiful diamonds. But he also got a lot of problems. The world is changing, and some people are not sure if they still want a king. Sitting across from him were very smart lawyers and people who know a lot about the rules of the country. They were looking through big, thick folders. On the front of the folders it said, "Succession Bill," in big, dark letters. This was the plan to change the law. Charles looked at a piece of paper with a list of names. He saw the number 8. That was where his brother, Andrew, was on the list. Even though Andrew had already lost his military jobs and his royal duties because of some bad things he did with a man named Jeffrey Epstein, the law still said he was 8th in line to be king. His blood still made him a royal, and only a new law could change that. The room was so quiet that you could hear the old clock on the wall going tick-tock, tick-tock. Charles did not say anything, but he held his hands together very tightly. You could tell he was thinking very hard and feeling very sad inside. Charles began to remember when they were just little boys. He thought about the times they played together at a place called Balmoral. They were brothers who liked each other back then. But as they grew up, things changed. One brother wanted to be king, and the other brother made some very bad choices. Now, there was a giant hole between them that could not be filled. Charles knew that being a king meant he could not make choices just because he was a brother. He had to think about what was best for the whole country. On the table, there was a report from the government. It said that the royal family was losing its good name because Andrew was still on the list of people who could be king. One of the smart advisors pushed the report closer to the king. He pointed to a part of the paper that talked about other countries like Canada and Australia. These countries are part of the Commonwealth, and they have to agree to the new law too. Changing who can be king is not just a small job in London. It is like a giant game of dominoes. If one thing changes, it affects people all over the world. If they tried to change the law and failed, it would make the king look very weak. It was a very big risk to take. In his head, Charles saw a picture of Andrew. He knew that their mother, the Queen, used to like Andrew the most. She always treated him like her favorite son. But now that love was making things harder for Charles. People across the country were very upset. They were asking for the king to be honest and fair. They were putting a lot of pressure on him to do something about Andrew. Charles looked out the window at the trees moving in the wind. He knew that the crown he wore was more important than anything else. He had promised to protect it when he had his big coronation ceremony. To keep the crown safe, he had to make a very hard and painful sacrifice. He had to be brave. He knew Andrew would not go away without a fight. He knew there would be a big argument coming very soon. The big machines of the government were starting to move, and there was no way to stop them now. Once the bill went to Parliament, it was official. The king turned around and looked at his advisers. His eyes were very sharp, and he looked very sure of himself. He did not make a big speech. He just gave a small nod and sighed a little bit. Then he picked up his pen. He was ready to start a historic change. He knew that to keep the royal fire burning, you sometimes have to cut off the parts that are bad, even if those parts are your own family. About 10 days before this, the house where Andrew lives, called Royal Lodge, was not peaceful at all. Usually it is a very quiet and royal place, but now it felt like everyone was holding their breath. News had leaked out from the government and the palace. It hit Andrew like a bolt of lightning. He was sitting in his private room with all his books when he heard the news. He felt a hot, stinging feeling go down his back. He had been a prince for his whole life, and he always thought he was important. But now, he felt like his own brother was trying to rip up his life. Andrew was not the kind of person to scream and shout. Instead, his fingers started to shake as he held the newspaper. He also had some secret notes from people he trusted. For Andrew, being eighth in line to be king was not just a number. It was the only thing he had left that made him feel honorable. He felt that even though he didn't have his military uniform anymore, his royal blood still made him special. If his name was taken off that list, it would be like he was being erased from history. He felt like he would be a nobody instead of a royal. The two brothers met in a secret house. They did not even say hello to each other. Andrew looked at Charles with eyes that were full of anger. He stood very tall and straight, like a soldier ready to fight his last battle. In Andrew's mind, what Charles was doing was not about protecting the crown. He thought it was a betrayal. He felt that Charles was being a bad brother. Andrew remembered how he had always stayed in the background. He was the spare, here, which means he was the backup in case something happened to Charles. He had spent his whole life waiting and helping, and now he felt like he was being thrown away like an old piece of trash. While Andrew was fuming, King Charles stayed very, very calm. He didn't get loud or angry back. This made Andrew even madder. Charles moved his hands slowly and looked at his brother with sad eyes. But even though he looked sad, he also looked like his mind was made up. There was nothing Andrew could say to change it. Andrew walked closer to Charles. They were standing very near each other, but it felt like they were miles apart. Andrew thought Charles was just using him. He thought Charles wanted to make the public happy by punishing him. He felt like a scapegoat, which is someone who gets blamed for everything so others look good. Andrew felt very bitter. He wondered if Charles still remembered the promises they made to their family. They had stood together by their mother's coffin and promised to stay united. To Andrew, being a royal was something you are born with. He didn't think any law or any group of people in Parliament had the right to take that away. His face became very hard and cold. He stopped looking at Charles like a brother. Now, he only saw a king who was doing math. He saw a king who was willing to cut his own family out of his life just to keep his job safe. They couldn't agree on anything, and the meeting ended. Andrew took a step back. This was a sign that the real fight was just beginning. It was not a fight with words anymore. It was an underground war. His eyes were red from crying or being tired, and they matched the fire burning in the fireplace. He was no longer trying to look sorry for his mistakes. Now, he was acting like a man who was trapped in a corner and had to fight to survive. As he walked out of the room, his shoes made a loud click, click sound on the floor. It sounded very final. He did not look back at his brother. Charles was left all alone in the room. Andrew was already thinking about how to use his secrets and his lawyers to fight back. Andrew went back to his study at Royal Lodge. The room was very dark and stuffy. There was only one small lamp on his desk that was covered in gold. It made a little bit of light fall on big piles of old papers. After his big fight with Charles, Andrew was not going to give up. He did not want to be forgotten. He started a very fast and angry counter-attack. He picked up his phone and started calling everyone he knew. He had many powerful friends that he had known for a long time. Some were old politicians and some were very rich people who owned newspapers. He hoped that these people still felt they owed him a favor because he was a prince. He sat in his big, high leather chair and made his eyes very small. He was thinking very hard. He did not want to beg for help. Instead, he stayed very quiet on the phone and waited for people to talk. He wanted to remind them of the secrets they shared or the big projects they worked on together. He used to be a special person who helped with trade, so he knew a lot of economic secrets. He was like a general looking at a map, trying to find a way to stop the law from being passed. He hoped that if he could make people confused or worried about the rules, they would talk about the law forever and never actually pass it. But soon, things started to go wrong for Andrew. He started to realize that the world was not the same as it used to be. The people who used to be very happy to talk to him were now being very careful. They were polite, but they didn't want to help him anymore. He would call people, and the phone would just ring and ring. No one would pick up. He looked at the dark screen of his phone and felt very betrayed. All those people who used to come to his fancy parties were now running away. They didn't want to hurt their own careers by helping a prince who was in trouble. He was becoming isolated, which means he was being left all alone. While Andrew was struggling with his phone, the government was working very fast. Emails were flying all over the world, from London to Canada to New Zealand. King Charles's helpers were talking to all the other countries to make sure they liked the new law. They wanted everything to be ready so that when the law went to Parliament, everyone would say yes. Andrew could feel that he was losing. He started pacing back and forth in his room. He looked out the window and saw the guards outside. They used to be there to protect him, but now they felt more like people watching a prisoner. Andrew started to get very desperate. He began looking through all his old drawers and files. He was looking at things from a long time ago, from 2001 to 2011. He was hoping to find a secret or a special piece of paper that could help him. He wanted to find something that would make the government stop the law. He looked at old names and business deals. He felt like a hurt animal trapped in a golden cage. The world outside was moving on without him. People were already learning the new list of who would be king, and Andrew's name was not on it. At the end of another night without sleep, Andrew stood still in the middle of all his messy papers. The sun was starting to come up over London. It made the room a little bit grey. Andrew looked very tired. You could see the lines of sadness on his face. The fact that no one answered his calls told him the truth. His power was gone. It had disappeared like mist on a cold morning. He finally realized that he wasn't just fighting a new law. He was fighting against a world that had decided they didn't want him anymore. The sky over London on the day everything changed was a very dark grey. It looked like a big storm was coming. Not just a storm with rain and thunder, but a storm for the royal family too. At Andrew's house, the peace was broken by the sound of loud car engines. Many police cars drove up the driveway. Andrew stood by his big front door. His heart was beating very fast. He saw the serious faces of the police officers. In that 1 second, his life as a protected prince was over. He was no longer safe because of his family name. He was arrested. The police said he had done some very bad things while he was working for the government a long time ago. They said he had abused his office, which means he used his power in a wrong and unfair way. This was not a mistake. It was the result of a long investigation that had been happening in secret. As the police told him his rights, Andrew felt a cold shiver go down his spine. He saw the files the police were carrying. They had papers from the years when he was a trade envoy. Those papers had names from his past, like Jeffrey Epstein. It felt like ghosts were coming back to haunt him. Andrew's mind was racing. He thought about all the private planes and the fancy parties he went to. He thought about secret documents that he might have shared with people who weren't supposed to see them. He tried to act like a royal and keep his head high, but he couldn't stop his breathing from being fast and shaky. When the police talked about handcuffs, Andrew felt a giant wave of shame. Handcuffs are for criminals, not for princes. This was the moment his dignity was truly gone. He looked at his own hands. These were the hands that had shaken hands with presidents and world leaders. Now, those same hands were shaking because he was in trouble with the law. The news of his arrest went all over the world in a few seconds. Every big TV station had red headlines saying that a British prince had been arrested. The public was very happy about this because they had been angry at Andrew for a long time. Andrew knew that even if he said he was innocent, most people had already decided he was guilty. The 8th place in the line of succession, the thing he fought so hard for, was now the reason everyone was so mad at him. Inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles got the news that his brother had been arrested. He sat in his office and was quiet for a very long time. The room felt like you couldn't breathe. Charles closed the file on his desk very slowly. The sadness he felt before was gone. Now, he only had the cold, hard heart of a king. He knew he had to save the crown. He knew this arrest was the final reason he needed to remove Andrew from the line of succession. There was no more room for Andrew to fight back. Andrew was taken to a place where he was watched very closely. He looked out a tiny window and saw his reflection in the glass. He looked like an old man who had lost everything. He was no longer a prince with helpers and gold. He was just a man standing on the edge of a dark hole. All his phone calls and his plans had failed. He felt the weight of his destiny closing in on him. For the first time in his whole life, the favorite son of the Queen realized that the palace doors were locked, and he could never go back inside. The bells of the big clock called Big Ben rang out in London. They sounded very deep and serious. It felt like they were marking a very big change in the kingdom. Inside the big building where the government meets, called the Palace of Westminster, everyone was very nervous. There are two parts of the government, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Both were filled with people who were waiting for something big to happen. The government and the palace together officially brought the bill to Parliament. This was the bill to take Andrew's name away from the throne. People were sitting on green benches, turning pages of thick books. The sound of the paper was like a dry rustling. They were looking at the old rules of the country very carefully. This wasn't just about one person anymore. It was about making sure the symbol of the king stayed strong. The politicians who liked the royal family were worried. They didn't want to change the rules of royal blood. They were afraid that if they changed the rules now, it might make it easier for people to mess with the royal family later. But the anger from the people was like a giant wave that could not be stopped. At the same time, people in other countries all over the world were looking at their own papers. From Canada to New Zealand, governments were talking about what was happening. King Charles stayed in his study for many hours, reading all the reports. He could feel that history was changing. Something surprising happened during this time. Many people thought the other countries might be unsure about the law, but instead, the younger countries said yes, very quickly. They thought the royal family needed to be more modern. They didn't want a prince who was in trouble to be part of the future. This agreement from other countries was like the final blow. It took away the last bit of hope Andrew had. He was stuck in a quiet room, listening to a small radio. Every time he heard his name and the word removal, his face would twitch. He used to sign big trade deals, but now he only gripped the arms of his chair. He thought about all the countries he had visited as a royal. Now, those same countries were helping to erase his name. He felt like the whole world had turned its back on him. The sun started to set, making the water in the river look red like blood. As the law got closer to being finished, a strange silence fell over the city of London. King Charles looked at a map of the world on his desk. He felt tired, but he also felt calm. He knew he was doing something that had to be done. He was changing the monarchy to make it better for the 21st century. Removing his brother was not just a punishment. It was a way to make the king's job about being responsible, not just about who your parents are. In his dark room, Andrew put his head in his hands. He heard the news on the TV in the next room. They said the first vote had happened. The rules of England were being rewritten with dark ink and very cold choices. The shadow of being forgotten was slowly swallowing Andrew. He was becoming like a ghost from the past. As the last bit of light disappeared, the sky became a very deep purple color. The street lamps started to turn on one by one. They made little pools of gold light on the sidewalk. Inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles was all alone. He was sitting at a big wooden desk. On the desk was the final copy of the law. It was a very important piece of paper. It had red ribbons and big wax seals from the government. Every lawyer had finished their work, and every other country had said, "Ois." Now, there was only one thing left to do. The king had to sign his name. Charles picked up his pen very slowly. It felt like the pen was made of heavy stone. It was much harder to pick up than any other paper he had signed. This was not just a regular job. With this signature, he was cutting off a big part of his own family tree. He was taking away a name that had always been next to his. He stopped for a second and looked at the empty space on the paper. He smelled the ink and the old wood of the desk. He took a big deep breath and then started to write. The ink flowed nicely, and his writing was clear. But at the very end of his name, his hand shook just a little bit. It was a tiny shake that showed he was still a little bit sad for his brother. But his duty as a king was stronger than his love as a brother. The moment he lifted the pen, everything changed. In the eyes of the law, Andrew was no longer on the list to be king. He was just a regular person now. He didn't have any royal titles to protect him. He was just like any other citizen. Far away from the palace, Andrew was told the news. A serious man in a suit came to his room and spoke very quietly. He put a piece of paper on the table. This time Andrew didn't get angry. He didn't throw things. He just felt numb. He felt like his spirit had been drained out of him. He walked over to the window and looked out. He saw the black cars of the police still waiting outside. His future was no longer about fancy parties. It was about courtrooms and lawyers. Every single thing that made him a prince had been taken away. His medals and his titles were now just old things that didn't mean anything anymore. They belonged to a life that was gone forever. The press office at the palace was already sending out a message to the world. They used big words like transparency and accountability. They wanted the world to think the king was being brave and modern. They wanted people to see that the monarchy could fix its own problems. But even though the message sounded strong, the people inside the palace felt very heavy and sad. In the long hallways with all the old paintings, people walked very quietly. Doors were closed softly. No one was celebrating. No one was drinking champagne or making toasts. This was not a happy time. It was a private family tragedy that was being solved by the government. King Charles walked out onto his balcony. He felt the cool night wind on his face. He knew that tomorrow the news would say he was a good, strong leader. People might even cheer for him. But in his own heart, he knew that the hole in his family would never truly be fixed. Andrew was gone from the family in a way that could never be changed. His absence would be felt at every family dinner and every royal event for years and years. Charles was now a more lonely king. The long chapter of scandals and rumours was finally over. The royal family was trying to show that they could follow the same rules as everyone else in the 21st century. As the night got darker and covered the whole city, Charles went back into his office and turned off the lamp. The darkness felt like a big curtain closing on the room. The paper he signed was still there, and the choices he made could never be undone. Andrew's last fight had failed. The crown had a deep scar on it now, but it was still moving forward. The monarchy was continuing its long journey of power and duty. After hearing this story, what do you think? Do you think King Charles was right to be a modern and fair leader? Or do you think he was being cold and mean to his own brother? It is a hard question to answer, but it is one that will be talked about for a very long time. What would you do if you had to choose between your family and your job? It is the kind of choice that changes a person forever. In the end, Charles chose the crown, and Andrew was left with nothing but the shadows of the past.